Carole, director, and so many other individuals who have come together to make this morning's service. Before we begin, I wanted to make a short announcement that tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. is the monthly board meeting. And please check in with Mike or Tom, who are here today, if you have any questions about having the link to be able to attend the board meeting tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening at 6. It will be held by Zoom. And now please join me in reading our centering thought for today. These are the words of Reverend John Burens, and they will be on your screen. Okay, so please join me in the centering thought. Blessed are those who yearn for deepening more than escape, who are not afraid to grow. Today, we are continuing our series of hybrid worship services. For today's service, we have members and friends and visitors who have gathered in person at the Fellowship Building here in Laguna Beach, masked and physically distanced, as well as others who are joining us from remote locations by Zoom. And I would like to give a special welcome today to any visitors who are joining us either here in the sanctuary or virtually. At UUFLB, we are a welcoming congregation. Whoever you are, whomever you love, no matter your age or gender, your ancestral or ethnic background, economic or immigration status, and whatever sincere questions that you bring with you today, we welcome you to our community of mutual caring and serious intent to grow as spiritual and moral beings. Our visitors today include two friends who are visiting us from the UU Society of the High Desert, Annie Nelson and Ross Quinn. During the time of the pandemic, several congregants from the UU Society of the High Desert have joined us on some Sundays by Zoom, and also sometimes on Friday at our Zoom at Noon discussion group. It is a joy to have you here with us in person on this beautiful Sunday morning, and also a joy to welcome Dan, who's also visiting us today. And it is a particular joy this morning to welcome Ross Quinn as our guest speaker. On Thursday this week, November 11th, we recognize the anniversary of the signing of the armistice that ended World War I, the day which we now know as Veterans Day. Today, in commemoration of Veterans Day, as we honor those who paid the price for our freedoms, we will also consider the true price of war and how we can pay the price of freedom from war. This morning, Ross will be challenging us to reflect on how our lives and the course of history combine in incredible complexity, how our Unitarian Universalist faith can help us to purposefully change the arc of our lives toward peace and toward hope across the generations. As I mentioned earlier, we have had some opportunities over the past year and a half to get to know Ross when he has been able to join us for Sunday morning Zoom worship services. And I have found that one of the true joys of being a worship associate is getting to know our speakers through the process that we go through to craft a worship service together. That has certainly been the case over the past week. Ross Quinn is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist who was active during his childhood in the Ventura Church, where his parents were founding members. This was at the time when Unitarians and Universalists came together to form Unitarian Universalism in 1961. And Ross has subsequently been involved in many ways in UU communities, including time spent as a youth at the UU Association headquarters on Beacon Street in Boston. So today, Ross will be drawing on his own history and that of his family, especially his father, in the reflections that he'll be sharing with us this morning. Ross and his family were also involved since the beginning in the founding and support of Camp de Benville Pines, an amazing place up in the mountains to the east of us. And Ross has asked us this morning to apply the speaker's honorarium to fundraising for the camp. So thank you very much, Ross. This is so very generous of you, and we are grateful. The very good news is that this request will go twice as far because there is an anonymous benefactor who is currently matching all donations to camp to help meet the financial needs for the camp during this challenging time. So I encourage those of you who are not already familiar with Camp de Benville Pines to talk with Ross and with UUFLB members who have spent time there, like Tom, like myself and Dara. It is a magical place. And for me, it is an essential part of our UU community in Southern California. Another joy in working with Ross on this service has been the opportunity to learn from his many experiences with the UU community, starting in his youth, including speaking at many UU congregations throughout the country. And it reveals to me that there are so many ways in which we can gather in community and share our commitment. So you will find during the service today that Ross has included many opportunities for the congregation to participate in responsive readings and unison readings, joining our voice in music, and looking at materials that Ross has brought for us together. All of this is a powerful reminder for me that ours is a living faith, enriched by the community that we are committed to build. So welcome to Ross. Welcome to all. It is good to be together in all of the ways that we join together in worship.
I'm going to unmask. I think my voice will be a little clearer. Thank you, Pam, for your more than kind introduction. Really beautiful. And it's just a pleasure to be here in person with you all today. We're going to start with the call to worship, which is number 580. For those of you who are here in the congregation, you can either look at it in the hymnal, in the back of the hymnal, number 580, or the words will also appear on the screen. We're going to do it responsively. I'll start when the words come up, and you'll see that there'll be regular type and italicized. Regular type, I'll say, the italicized type you can see there is for all of us to say in unison, both here in this wonderful church in person and online. So we'll go ahead and start. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each of us to all.
There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others.
Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice.
It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community.
The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that we must see, and our strength is too limited to do all that must be done.
Together our vision widens and our strength is renewed.
Now, I'm going to use the singing bowl just to symbolize the entrance into spiritual space, holy space, some call it, and just to concentrate ourselves and to center ourselves.
Let us take a moment to remind ourselves why we come together as a community. I invite you to read these words together when and if it feels right for you. If you wish, for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, please unmute your microphone. It is always powerful when we join our voices
They can't
together.
see.
The words of the unison affirmation, which capture this church's mission, are on your screens. Please join me in reading. Love
Love is the spirit of this fellowship,
and
and
service
service
is
is
its
its
law.
law.
This
This
is
is
our
our
great
great
covenant
covenant,
to dwell,
to
dwell
together
together
in
in
peace,
peace,
to seek,
to seek the truth in love,
and to
and
help
to help
one
one another.
another.
In my little home church, we always read the sources of our faith prior to reading the principles. The sources are the forces out of which our principles come. And I'm just going to read the sources of our faith. For those of you in the congregation, you can find them in the front of the hymnal. They're on the very first page before the songs begin. This is, okay. Anyway, oh, do you want to, okay. At times, our own light goes out and yet is rekindled by the spark from another person. Each of us has cause to thank with deepest gratitude those who have ignited our light, the flame within us. And let's say together, let us hallow this time together, rekindling the chalice lamp of our heritage, rekindling the light of each other. And I'm sorry if I've gotten out of sync. This happens. So I'm sorry, I skipped over to our sources. The sources, I believe, are the preface to our principles, which we'll read together, but I like to read the sources myself. The sources of our faith. The living tradition which we share draws from many sources. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and which instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Grateful for the religious pluralism that enriches and ennobles our faith, we are inspired to deepen our understanding and extend our vision. As free congregations, we enter into this covenant, promising to one another our mutual trust and support.
And I ask you now to join together with me in reading the 7 Unitarian Universalist principles. They will shortly be on your screen. And throughout the service, throughout our practice, we draw on these principles. I know Ross will be drawing on them later today. So as we read the principles together, please read them with meaning and thought. Allow them to deeply sound within your own soul. Read together with me. We, the member
congregations, Unitarian Universalist
Association,
to affirm,
covenant
to affirm
and promote
worth,
the
and
the inherent worth and
dignity of every person,
equity and compassion
passion
in human
in
relations,
human relations,
acceptance of one another, and encouragement
to
to
spiritual
spiritual growth
in our
in our
congregations,
congregations,
a free
a free
and
and responsible
responsible
search for
for
truth
truth
and meaning,
the
the
right
right
of
of
conscience
conscience
and
and
the
the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large.
the
The
goal
goal of world community with
with
peace,
peace,
liberty, and
and
justice
for all.
respect
respect
For the
the
interdependent
interdependent
web
web of
of
all
all
existence,
we are a
of
part.
which we are a part.
Thank you. Our opening hymn this morning is number 318. We Would Be One. We invite those of you who are attending by Zoom to sing out from home, even though you are muted. And here within the fellowship building, we have the opportunity to join our voices together in music by humming quietly or by softly singing the words. The hymn is number 318 in your hymnals, and the words will be available in chat on Zoom. Please enjoy the music of our amazing and talented music director, Carole.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. We'll all sing together with We Would Be One, and I hope you sing out loud and clear.
For those of you that are here in the congregation, we're going to do something that is always one of my favorite things to do in congregations where we have children. We invite the children to come forward and sit on the steps and chairs or wherever on the floor, and we chat with them for a minute or two. But I don't see very many children here this morning. We have one. Oh, where is she? Here she comes. Okay. So anyway, well, that's just wonderful. We're so glad. Hello. What's your name? Dina? Zena. Well, thank you, Zena. It's a pleasure to meet you. And it's so wonderful to have real children around. Sometimes in our church, we don't have any, and we miss you. We think you're special. Anyway, yeah, of course. And you can sit with her, of course. So anyway, I was going to ask, and you look like you're far too gentle of a soul for this, but I was going to ask Zena, are you ever bad to somebody? Do you ever do something bad? Like I used to do bad things to people sometimes when I was little? You don't want to talk about that. And I don't blame you because you're far too pretty and young and innocent to go for all that. But if there is anybody who would like to answer a question, pretend to be a child in the audience, in the congregation. Were you ever mean to your little stepbrother or little sister or your best friend? Maybe hit him sometimes because you got so mad. Did you ever do something that was just that you knew wasn't right, but you couldn't help yourself from doing that? Anybody care to share something like, oh, Annie, oh, good.
Well, I did not grow up with any brothers or sisters, and so I didn't have anyone to pick on. But one of my earliest memories is my cousin chasing me. And I don't know why, but I've always had a fear of being chased. And I picked something up and grabbed it and turned around and smashed it on his head. And then we had to go out and explain to our parents why this little toe-headed kid with a crew cut was bleeding from the head. But it was out of fear. It wasn't out of anger or being mean. It was out of fear. And I did that to a little boy in our neighborhood who was chasing me as well.
Similar? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I'm the oldest child. And my brother was 2.5 years younger than I. And, you know, I started thinking about all this Unitarian stuff and went to our Sunday schools and supposed to do all the right things. But I would be so mad at him sometimes. He would say and do the stupidest things. Well, of course, he was 7 and I was 9. So anything he said was stupid. But I'd get mad at him and I'd get so frustrated. I'd pound him on the shoulder, on his arm a couple of times. And I knew I wasn't supposed to do that. And of course, I don't do that anymore. And my brother's a wonderful guy. But how come I did that? And I always think about those sorts of things. How come we're mean to people sometimes, even when we don't want to be? And for those that are going to stay and listen, some of the children will usually go off, but if they can stay, they'd like to. But it's hard. It's hard to have our passions in control and to do the things that we know we should do sometimes. So we just bless you and hope that you can do the good things like I didn't do when I was young. And I think also that this is some of the reason why we fight with each other individually and why we fight with each other as political parties and why we fight against each other as nations. And we'll leave that thought. And in response to the children's chat, we have a little, what I call a recitative, and the words will appear on the screen. And it's very short. We'll just sing it once. But I'll sing this tune for you. Since Carole has laryngitis, she's not able to sing and do all the accompaniment. But it goes like this. I'll sing it once. How could anyone ever tell you you are anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you are less than whole? Did anyone ever tell you that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How deeply you're connected to my soul.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. Thank you, Zena. Thank you, Annie, for participating and sharing. It is as much a blessing to be able to give as it is to receive. In this self-governing, self-sustaining community, we recognize that it is our responsibility to do both give and to receive, and to do both well. So during this time of offering, we'll be passing a basket within the fellowship, and the information on your screen provides 2 additional ways you can give, either electronically or by sending a check to the fellowship. Our fellowship depends on the love and the generous contributions from our members, and we are empowered by the innumerable gifts of those who join in covenant with us. All of our gifts generously given are needed for the fellowship and its continued good work in the world. And now, Carole, I think we'll play. Now, please stand as you are comfortable as we sing to each other words of sincere thanks. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. And Carole will be leading us.
Carole's playing just adds so much. Thank you. Thank you so. We come to our cares and concerns, our joys and sorrows. The way that I like to do that. This is a bowl that I made years ago, over 50 years ago now, that I use for joys and concerns, cares and sorrows. In the bottom of the bowl, which I've just uncovered, there are a bunch of beads. And the beads represent all the joys and concerns, all the cares and sorrows, all the connections that have been shared in this church throughout many decades. They're all here. And as we publicly express our joys and concerns, our cares and sorrows, I'm going to drop a stone, maybe 2, into the bowl, which contains water. And the water ripples out from the stone and goes to the edge of the bowl and then reflects in waves back into the center, symbolizing how our cares and concerns ripple out. They affect us, but they ripple out from us and they affect the others that are around us. They affect our community, they affect each other, and in turn they come back to us. Expressing them publicly for those that we can, and we know there are some that we cannot express publicly. Support reflected back from those around, from this congregation to each of us. Help us bear our joys, bear our concerns, bear our sorrows and losses, and help us to become one in a blessed community. So does anyone have a joy or concern wish to share publicly? If not, I like to just sing a little quick two-line thing, which we'll sing twice, and it goes like this. I'll sing it once. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. Title of the sermon today is Veterans Day, Fractals and Freedom. On this coming Veterans Day, we commemorate those who paid the price for our freedoms. And this Veterans Day will also be the 9th anniversary of my father's death. He died October 30th, 2012, at the age of 91. My dad was a 22-year Navy officer. He was active service in both World War II and in Korea and in the reserves. He served from 1943 to 1965. He left the Navy as the Vietnam War was ramping up. I ask a request of you this morning. I ask you to consider my father's life, your own life, and the lives of those around you, and even the course of our history as an incredibly complex fractal curve, which I'll explain, and to consider the true price of war and how we can help prevent it, which I call the price of freedom from war. Not the price of war, but the price of freedom from war. So I'll start with the hard part. What are fractals? To quote Wikipedia, fractal is a geometric curve that can be split into parts, each of which is a reduced size but altered copy of the whole. Their features include, among other things, fine structure, which is apparent at any scale, which is to say that the closer one looks at a fractal curve, the more there is to see. And they are infinitely complex and irregular. So in those respects, fractal curves are like our lives. In both, each point is changed by all that has gone on before. Each point on a fractal curve is calculated by incorporating the results of the curve's previous points, just as in our lives. The points in our lives represent the integration of all the previous points that we have lived. And importantly, in fractal curves, even the smallest changes at the beginning will over time be vastly magnified. This is critical, vastly magnified by the time one does, say, 1 million subsequent calculations. So seemingly trivial changes at the beginning of the chain compound over time to cause profound, unpredictable, and unrecognizable changes in the pattern. Fractals, like life, are complex, changeable, and unpredictable until calculated or lived. Fractal curves are also like history. 103 years ago, on November 11th, 1918, an armistice to stop World War I was signed in France. It was just a ceasefire between the still warring nations on the Western Front, France, the United States, and England versus Germany. On the other fronts of the war, fighting had already stopped. But on the Western Front, the armistice was to take place at 11 a.m. Paris time, November 11th, 1918. The morning the armistice was signed, in Allied Supreme Commander Ferdinand Foch's own railroad car, which is a point I'll return to later. From there, telegrams went out to the European capitals. And in London, English Prime Minister Lloyd George gave a speech in the House of Commons, which contained the famous line, "I hope that we may say that thus, on this fateful morning, came an end to all wars. So here the popular sobriquet about World War I was born, that it was, quote, the war to end all wars. The green book that you see in front, which Annie is going to pass around for those in the sanctuary, and we have pictures from it for those online. This is Leslie's photographic review of the Great War, published in 1919 by Leslie's Weekly Magazine. I bought it many years ago, one of my touchstone possessions. And while it does review the story of World War I, it tells another story, one of romanticizing war and of confusing patriotism with hatred for its foreign enemies. Listen to the editor's words in the introductions. This photographic history should go into every home that sent a soldier to the colors, to every home that has a boy or girl in school, into every home where hearts are still responsive to the thrill of glorious deeds. Strangely, I agree with the editor. We should all have this book or be familiar with ones like it, not as a commemoration of the glories and excitement of war, but rather as an example of the terrible tides of racism, prejudice, and jingoism to which our country, and probably all countries, are prone. But back to 1918, World War I had degenerated into a stagnant, deadly affair, seemingly unwinnable, but because of pride, seemingly unstoppable. Troops were deployed, as you know, in parallel sets of trenches, mired in mud, separated by a no man's land of landmines and barbed wire. And this grim reality was the polar opposite of the patriotism and the honor and the ethnic pride, to say nothing of ethnic prejudice, that was whipped up in the soldiers' respective homelands at the war's beginning. Finally, the Treaty of Versailles formally ended the war, World War I, on June 18th, 1919, 6 months later, with the armistice of November, which the armistice of November 11th, 1918 only paused. The peace was signed in the Palace of Versailles in its Hall of Mirrors, which could perhaps be better named the Hall of Smoke and Mirrors. In the 7 months between the armistice and the peace, difficult issues of blame and payment were thrashed out, but unfortunately, principles of justice and long-range goals could not overcome the hot passions for immediate revenge and reparations. Germany was punished, losing multiple territories, including the borderline province of Alsace-Lorraine, back to victorious France. Germany was to be demilitarized, and it had to pay steep reparations, hobbling its economy. And insultingly, Germany had to accept all blame for the war to end all wars. Thus, this brutal war and its peace created a huge group of civilian victims, millions who had been instructed by their leaders in the rightness of their nations and the wrongs that had been inflicted on them that needed to be redressed. And neglect of these defeated and hopeless people were allowed to allowed their unredressed wrongs mixed with rage and helplessness to morph into the ultra-nationalism, fascism, racism, and Nazism that characterized World War II. And sadly, on both sides, as the Japanese-American experience crystallized in Manzanar shows us, and the African-American experience in the segregated US armies will attest. In 1918, it was widely noted that the same Palace of Versailles Hall of Mirrors was where the treaty ending the last Franco-Prussian War was signed some 50 years earlier in 1869. Then Alsace-Lorraine was ceded back to Germany by France when Germany was victorious. And clearly a cycle of wars was planted and reaped again and again, resulting in World War I and World War II. Were any of these wars really about freedom, as we like to think? Or is it simpler, say that it was just to have the power or payback or for previous insults, or maybe just that the French don't like the Germans and vice versa? In Alsace-Lorraine, when the French were victorious, the German families were discriminated against and hundreds of thousands were displaced back to Germany. Whenever Germany was ascendant and victorious, the reverse happened, back and forth. But here we return to Supreme Commander, Field Commander Fox railroad car, where the armistice was signed, November 11th, 1918. Just 21 years later, in 1939, Hitler had the French sign their own World War II surrender in the very same railroad car, psychologically righting the wrong and the shame of the German defeat in World War I. History matters. To me, this history of European wars is a fractal curve of war and revenge, each point on the curve different in its details, and while related to its predecessor, is yet unpredictable and unknowable until it's calculated and lived day by day. Some know this cycle as the Newtonian reaction to every action. Others, it's karma. But I see its effect in these World War I images, which you're seeing, of a horrible war in stalemate, of a war with a life of its own, becoming nearly impossible to stop. And this rings especially true to me now, given our recent wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and especially, in my mind, our nebulous war on terror. And this was true also in the 1960s, when I grew up in Vietnam, and in 1918 France. Each to me is but another point on the fractal curve of history. That's why it's so crucial to clearly see the repetitive fractal life curve and to know this history. Friends, the more we know about these things, the closer and the more real our personal connections get to this history, I feel the less likely we are to fall back onto these same old traps, repetitive fractal cycles of war and violence and retribution. We need that knowledge to fuel our will to grow, to help transform ourselves out of this cycle. Knowing this history powers our personal evolution towards peace, and which is the first step in society's evolution towards peace. The stakes, unfortunately, are unimaginably greater today than they were in President Wilson's time, with the modern danger of nuclear weapons. And while images of smoking ruins of conventionally bombed cities in World War I and World War II are horrific enough, the magnitude of nuclear destruction is another thing entirely. This is how we prevent our society from demanding the nuclear button be pushed. I believe the best deterrent lies in a deep and personal knowledge of the nuclear button's consequences and remembering that history. But there are not many of us left now who have actually seen the aftermath of a nuclear war and who shudder at its thought. I am fortunate to have a personal first-degree link to the aftermath of nuclear war through my father. He was a member of the American occupation forces in Japan, stationed in Nagasaki just 3 months after a single small atomic bomb annihilated most of the city of Nagasaki. The pictures The photographs that I shared this morning, the pictures here are his own, taken with his own camera. And these are now mine, a personal treasure, which I will share with you. And they'll appear, that's my father, for those of you looking online, kneeling in the front of the second row. It says platoon in Nagasaki. And you can see in his own handwriting the date. Dad's photographs provoke in me a fearsome, recurring question. How can we prevent such devastation from ever occurring again? How can we vaccinate ourselves against this illness of war and the hatreds which bring it on, and our tempers that we even have as children? What is the price of freedom from war? War, like other great life events, changes people and their country. Sometimes the changes are for the better when experiences of war act as a crucible and force growth and maturity and strength in a personality. But too often experiences of war can overwhelm, wound, and destabilizing people. And the same is true for nations. I believe that our beloved country is wounded. It's been seduced by successes in World Wars I and II, and we've come to believe that we are largely invincible and special. Our military successes, combined with our political stalemates, now enable a dangerous authoritarianism, a belief that the exercise of authoritarian militaristic power is the best way to accomplish almost anything. I fear for our country on this Veterans Day. I fear we are turning away from the democracy of Athens and toward the authoritarian military dictatorship of Sparta, to invoke Greek history. And this sooner or later will lead to military overreach and ultimately be our undoing. I feel this could only happen to a country which has tasted the addictive success and glories of won wars. So this Veterans Day week, I ask again the question, to save our country, what is the price of retaining our freedoms? And what is the price of freedom from war? Friends, my personal answer to this question rests in the heart of our Unitarian Universalist faith, our Unitarian Universalist 7 principles, which we read this morning, and in our covenant to each other. Listen to how I feel our formal principles work within us. When we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person, when we require justice, equity, and compassion in our relationships for others, and with other nations, then when we accept one another and respect the interdependent web of life of which we are all a part, we cannot demonize the other. We find that he or she is like me and that their strand in the web is just as necessary for the web of all existence as is mine. When we respect the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process in the workings of our society, we automatically deny totalitarianism and its need to violently enforce a single view on others. And coupling all that with our American goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, both the need for wars and the conditions that provoke them are diminished. And lastly, when we pursue a diligent, free, and responsible search for truth and meaning, we inoculate ourselves and our precious children against the malicious effects of propaganda. Hatred then becomes hard, and the wisdom of honesty and restraint naturally arises in our interactions with others. Truth is not exclusive to any particular ideology, person, race, class, religion, culture, or era, even our own. We Unitarian Universalists instinctively know that truth evolves. Friends, here's the answer to my first question. By making the conscious effort to reflect our 7 principles in our life's daily interactions, we grow spiritually. We become authentic and we change into who we truly are and who we truly want to be. And we reject external totalitarian forces who try to make us into what they want us to be for their own usually evil purposes. The price of our freedoms is paid daily when we personally practice our UU7 principles. But what of my second question? What is the price of freedom from war? Here, my answer comes from our second principle, which urges us to work for justice, equity, and most importantly, compassion. Compassion in human relations. Compassion, I feel, is the capstone attribute of our 7 principles, the key human quality. When we develop compassion for others, waging war against them becomes very hard. Compassion, springing naturally from our 7 principles, inoculates us against hate and is itself, along with the knowledge of history, the price of freedom from war. Seen this way, our 7 principles are the stuff of hope, of peace, of our freedoms, and of loving characters development. We are fortunate indeed to have them. And that's why I read them explicitly, not just print them out, but read them in every service that I lead. Here we return to fractals. Recall again that our lifelike fractal curves change radically and they evolve through countless repetitions by tiny but cumulative changes in every daily calculation. Since each day is composed of millions of thoughts and memories and actions, imagine what enormous good may ultimately be generated by consciously changing a thought or action, a single one, towards the good. Who knows how big our own tiny positive chosen actions and thoughts could fractally grow. I believe, and I truly believe this, they can change our world and our web for the better. The rigorous math of fractals reflected in our lives show us this is possible and validates hope in our lives and in our faith, but only when each of us makes the effort to make it so. I want to conclude with some thoughts about my father and his pictures. Like most World War II vets, he never spoke much about his experiences, even though Dad, as you know, was stationed in Nagasaki after the atomic bomb was dropped. But he did show me these pictures you're seeing from time to time in my youth. After World War II in Korea, our family moved back to California in 1956 to Ventura. And I believe that between his time in Nagasaki and his first years in Ventura, that Dad was changing, that he had changed the equation to his life's curve in a small way at first. But his change accelerated when my parents found Unitarian Universalism, to which they were new at the Santa Paula Universalist Church, where they found others of like mind and spirit. And then, still in the Navy Reserves, he began to act in ways that were uncharacteristic for a military man. He gradually sensed the foolishness of the developing Vietnam War, and beginning in about 1963, our family, with many other local people, particularly from the nascent Ventura Unitarian Church in those years, we stood in front of the Bank of America branch in Ventura every Saturday for a silent vigil for an hour against that war. By 1965, Dad left the Navy after 22 years. But I am convinced that Nagasaki was a crucible for my father, that his experience there set in motion a long-term cascade of personal change. That change, only a small seed at first, grew to be a deep force within him and radiated out into the world, which he left a better place. Instead of being a military type commander, which he was in rank, he changed into a supportive and nurturing figure to us kids, and to my stepbrothers and sisters and their kids, and to our church and to our community. And I could go on and on here, but I believe his experience of Nagasaki's atomic destruction caused within him a transformational need to work on the side of creation rather than destruction, for good instead of for war and nuclear evil, which he had experienced. He knew that history and he remembered it, and he made sure I knew it. He, along with my mother, made the down payment on my freedoms, and I will say that I walk in big shoes. On this Veterans Day, our thoughts naturally draw near to those who have died defending our country. They truly have paid the price, both for freedom and the price of war. But I also believe each of us must still pay the price of these freedoms. Its price lies in the personal, constant effort that it takes for all of us to remain loving, supportive, open, compassionate, courteous, and vulnerable in the everyday interactions and the everyday things we say and do, despite living in a world that largely isn't open and vulnerable, and which sees these qualities as weaknesses. Freedom's cost in this larger sense is to be more in accord with how we want to act, both communally and individually, with dignity and compassion, and to be more in accord with our UU7 principles. This leads straight to the core of my UU faith. I believe we need to purposefully change the arc of our lives, fractal curves, and to grow them towards good. Because true change, individual and societal, starts from one's own heart. I believe that our Unitarian Universalist 7 principles give us practical goals to guide our work of personal and social change. I also believe that our Unitarian Universalist fellowship, this fellowship right here, gives us community and the strength and the encouragement we need from each other to stick together, to pursue the changes we want and need to make in our lives. This is the heart of our mutual covenant. I believe that when we change ourselves, we change each other. Our changes reflect out into those around us. So we must model and we must be the changes we want to see in others and in our nation. I believe we must deepen love for those around us and for ourselves, that we must work to develop and extend compassion in our hearts. And I believe we must remember our history. I believe that each of us, especially when bound together in a loving community, can build a better world, a better web of all existence, and enable transformational, unpredictable, fractal changes for profound good. My friends, I believe in all of this, in our common personal power, and that all of you in this Unitarian Universalist congregation and its friends, all of you are truly heroes of change and heroes for peace. So blessed be us all in this wonderful UU fellowship, all of us. And namaste, for the holiness in you brings out the holiness in me.
Wow, thank you, Ross, for being here today, for sharing some of your history, your thoughts, for inspiring us. As we bring our service to a close, I'd like to invite you all to join with me in a responsive reading, which is the words of Martin Luther King Jr., and they will be up on the screen for you. Again, I'll read the words in bold. If you could read the words in italic, a network of mutuality. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love
can do
that.
For all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
Through peaceful means.
We shall hew out the mountain of despair, a stone
of hope.
Now is the time for us to extinguish the chalice at UUFLB and within our homes. Ross, if you would extinguish our chalice today. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Please stand now as you are comfortable, form a circle, and join in singing together with Carole our closing hymn, number 381, From All Who Dwell Below the Skies.
Please join me.
Go ahead and sing. I want to go do some dishes. Through every land, on every tongue.
Okay. And now, as I like to close our own services, here it is. I have the words here someplace. Here we go. We always sing, join hands and sing and say together the words from many different faith cultures, and to represent our oneness and how we feel and how we respond as human beings. So the words are on the screen, and we'll go ahead and say them. Amen. Asha, aloha, shalom, salam, sit sirikam, namaste, and blessed be. Thank you all. Go, you may be seated.
So now please join with Carole as we sing our closing song, Let There Be Peace on Earth.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With earth as our mother, we are family. Let us walk with each other, perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With